Look at that. It says we're live. Hello, and let's see if I can remember how to do this. Welcome to Scalawags, episode number 40. You may have thought it was never going to happen, and so did we, but it did. We're back, and we're badder than ever.
Exactly. You didn't think it was possible for our show to get worse. It's about to happen.
Hey, check out the stereo effect. I distinctly heard stereo movement of the music there.
How did the fading of the music go? I was like moving my phone away from the microphone gradually.
It was good. It was really stylized. You should take a side job as a DJ.
I thought you were going for the kind of stereo movement effect, like the Beatles used to use and stuff like that.
Okay, 2 phones next time.
I am literally half of the age that would be required to know what the Beatles used to do. I just want to put that out there.
So it was a bunch of bands at the time, actually. When the Beatles started recording, everything was monophonic. And then stereo came along and bands started to experiment with, deliberately isolating things and moving things around on the channels and stuff like that.
Daniel, you probably thought the Flaming Lips invented that in, 1997, right?
Yeah, something like that. If I had any knowledge of pop culture, I would have been.
So I guess we're hoping that Heather will be able to show up. She is in Kazakhstan, I believe.
She claimed to be in at least 2 different countries beginning with K. So
yes.
It seemed like a definite, I'd say CIA front, except she's in Switzerland. So.
Well, this is like typical American sort of post-Soviet geography problems, where all of them are stans and all of them start with K, and we don't really know what they mean.
That's the problem. Is she's actually shown up to the wrong one, and that's why she's not on the program. She's like, oh crap, I booked the wrong ticket.
In the process of being deported.
That almost happened to me in Canada. They almost didn't let me in. Yeah, I tried to get into Canada. I was doing some training up there.
Canadians are nicer than God.
I know, until you come in and tell them that you're going to do some training, and then they're like, could a Canadian do this training? And I'm like, I don't think so. There's not many people that know Scala at the time, was what I said. And they held me for 3 hours while they decided whether to let me in to do the training or not.
Wow. Well, I had heard that Uncle Bob Martin got deported from the UK one time when he was going in to speak at a conference. They literally they turned him away at the border, put him on a flight back to the US right away.
I thought that was going to happen to me in Canada, but they let me in the end. And then they were very polite.
Yeah, so they're incredibly polite. I'm sure they would have been polite about deporting you, too.
Yeah, they would have said, we're terribly sorry, sir, but you have to get the hell out of our country right now.
I love Canada. Such a great place.
So we're off to a good start, talking about everything except Scala.
That's right. What have you guys been up to? I haven't...
Well,
I think a lot of people think that we sort of hang out in our downtime and only grace the world with our presence when we deem it worthy. But we literally only talk to each other on the Hangout. So
and that's a shame. Well, that's not entirely true. I've been hanging out with Josh recently. Anyway, you should go, and then I'll tell you. I'll give an update. Go, Seth.
Oh, well, I've been doing no Scala whatsoever because I was on the road. I have moved to San Francisco, which you can see out the window there.
So you were really willing to relocate?
Yes.
You must have been willing to relocate.
I'm the one who's ruined it for everyone by actually doing it. I'm like a strike breaker. So yeah, San Francisco. I signed a lease on Tuesday, and then before that, I was on leave from my job for 3 months. I drove across the country. I went to Yellowstone and Grand Teton.
Oh, nice.
North Dakota, Idaho. I saw all. If you make a list of the least densely populated states in the United States, I hit 5 of the bottom 7.
Well, if you drive through the middle part of the country, you're basically guaranteed to do that. I swear there are 4 people and a bunch of cows that live in Nebraska.
Did you get to see the biggest ball of string? Isn't that a thing?
No, I saw the world's largest sandhill crane.
Wow, that's amazing. What is a sandhill crane? Is that a bird?
Well, I mean, this thing it's educational. People like you don't know. I think
we are time once again to raise the intellectual bar.
I suspect it's probably also the world's only unusually large sandhill crane. This was by the side of the road in North Dakota. So that was pretty much the highlight.
Got it. Wow. Okay.
But I'm totally.
Did you see the Continental Divide sign in North Dakota?
I crossed the Continental Divide about 1 million times.
Okay, so this is the Northern Divide rather than the East-West Divide, and this is literally my favorite road sign in like all of the U.S. because you're in the middle of nowhere. You're just outside of Fargo. You're literally in the middle of nowhere. It is deadpan flat, and there's a completely unassuming sign that says Continental Divide, and you're like, what? And it's true though. It's the Continental Divide between the Atlantic and the Arctic, but like, it doesn't make any sense at all because it's in the middle of something that is like flatter than a pancake.
Yeah. Wow. Cool. That's pretty neat.
Yeah. So, but I'm totally back on the job on Scala. I read I cleared my inbox of 2,000 Jira notifications and GitHub notifications. I'm going through those Scala Jira tickets like crazy. I am officially back.
Cool, man. Maybe we're back. Let's try and see if we're back.
Let's see if we're back. What have you been doing, Bill?
Well, I've been up to all sorts of things. I foolishly decided to get involved with not one but 2 startups. One of them's official. The other one is sort of more of a hobby, but picking up quite quickly still at the moment, and it's pretty interesting. So for the main one, I'm with a company called SIBO now. We do a lot of mathematical and GIS stuff. GIS is kind of a return to form for me. It was what my master's degree was in, and I did GIS for the first few years of my career, and then it looked like it wasn't really going anywhere, and I moved off and did a bunch of other simulation modeling and genetic stuff. And now I'm back in that, and it's really fun, actually. If we get time, I'd love to talk about some of the neat things that Scala's brought to the mix in that. But then the other side of it is this wine application, which is like a really ordinary sort of RESTful JSON API in front of a database. And it's been really good for me to do something that, most people do, as opposed to working in some kind of weird genetic risk analysis thing or something like that. And the amazing thing is how easy it is now. It is super easy to put these kind of RESTful APIs together.
Tools to make it better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Partially as a function of literally most people doing this with most of their time.
Right.
People have spent a lot of time making it much smoother.
It is really smooth. It's super quick to change things, and then on top of that, I've been using Heroku as the deployment, and I'm the engineer. It's me. That's the engineering team, and I'm only part-time on it. I get a few hours a week to work on it, and yet with Heroku you can roll out. You got this full deployment pipeline where you put it into Git and it immediately deploys onto the development, and then when you're ready you can move it up to staging with the click of a button, and it's like having a really professional kind of pipeline like you get in a big company, only it's just me, and I pressed a couple of buttons and got this kind of full deployment pipeline. It was really neat. So yeah, super excited about that. Like you said, that it's one of those things when you're working in what everybody else is actually doing as opposed to some weird off the side crazy thing. It's really amazing how far things have come and how easy it's got. So yeah, we've been doing that, and then probably what feeds into the first item. I will let you go in a minute, Daniel, but Josh and I have been in contact because we're working on our keynote talk thingy for Scala World, which is all about 4. We decided to just take one part of Scala, the 4 comprehension, and really dig into it. All the aspects, what happens in the compiler, how you can write your own stuff to use it, what you can do in 4s, all that sort of thing.
If your slides do not contain the words "with filter" photoshopped to look like a little demon, I will be very disappointed.
Oh, well, we haven't yet, but you know what? I think we should do. We're putting in a lot of humor into it, and in particular, a lot of puns. There are a surprising number of puns that you can get out of 4. So it's quite, including things. Well, no, I won't give away the secrets.
Don't spoil anything.
Yeah, you'll have to come to the talk if you want to see it. So, what have you been up to?
Hey, before you start, Daniel, you have a listener question from Lutz. He wants to know what you're building the site with.
Oh, what I'm building the site with. What does Lutz work on? Am I going to upset him?
Well, he's hoping you're using Scala and perhaps Akka HTTP and/or Play.
I am using Play, so he'll be happy about that. It's actually pretty simple. It's Play with Play.json. I'm not using Akka HTTP because right now the site is still 2.4 of Play, which I don't believe has the Akka HTTP stuff in it yet, right? Is that right? It doesn't have the stream. The 2.5 was where they added the streams, I think. And we'll be upgrading to that at some point. But right now it's using Play, JSON, and Scala, of course. So, and Scala-like JDBC is the Postgres interfacey bit, which I've been quite pleased with, actually. That's a nice little tight, lightweight database component for doing that stuff. So, yep. I didn't. So where is that question? I don't see. Oh, never mind.
Q&A icon on the left.
Oh yeah, there we go. I hope. At least I hope Scala. Yeah, it's definitely Scala. So, right, Daniel should go.
Yeah. So, I've been doing like a million conferences and things, traveling quite a lot, moving, fixing Sublime Text.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so I know you use Sublime pretty extensively. You should probably use my like syntax highlighting mode because it literally fixes everything. So you have highlighting for like lambdas now, and like numerics are fixed, and like types get special highlighting correctly, and I mean everything is a lot better. The only downside is like it doesn't work very well with Monokai because Monokai is actually terrible. But like as long as you're using a different color scheme, it will look really, really good. And this should go into the next major Sublime 3 release.
Oh, that's fantastic. Can I get it in the meantime?
You can get it in the meantime. If you go to, I tweeted out a link to it the other day, but like there's a pull request up on the Sublime Packages thing, and you can just sort of follow the breadcrumbs to find my branch and then pull it in.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, because that's something I've been doing. You know, I kind of backed off mainly because of busyness. Backed off of the community scene a little bit since becoming less involved with the sips and slips. But I have been working still on the Enzyme Sublime stuff. Yes. And that's going pretty nicely, actually. I use it as my primary development environment about 80 to 90% of the time now. And it's really getting much better.
I tried it. I basically go in this cycle where I like every 2 or 3 months I try Enzyme again, and I always get just a little bit further in actually making it work. And yesterday I managed to actually like fully make it work, as in like getting error highlighting and auto completion and everything on a non-trivial project. The Enzyme process required 1.5 gigs of memory to actually like do that.
It isn't lighter.
It isn't running. Lightweight. No.
That's the mistake people make, especially by the time you're running, because I tend to run Enzyme and SBT to do the building at the and leave them both up in server mode. It uses up a lot of memory when you do that.
It chunks out. So so that was interesting. And I think my major complaint with that is it's very status bar dependent.
Yeah, well I think that if you find that there's a way not to do that in Sublime, please tell me. But that's the only way I've found to do it so far. Is it doesn't seem to have a lot of support for like non-modal dialog boxes and things like that, which would be much nicer if I could find those.
Yeah, there's a new like Sheets abstraction in some of the dev builds that they use for things like the jump to definition that's built into Sublime. Like you can actually hover over tokens now, and it'll actually show you like where you're going to jump to, like what are your options. And there's some other things like that, but I don't know if you can actually plug into it with a plugin yet. So anyway, 90% of the audience probably doesn't care about Sublime Text.
No. So well, but they should. It's getting better.
It's getting better. Yeah, I think I'm pretty confident in saying that it's now definitively the second best Scala mode for any editor behind Emacs. It's like with the changes that I made, it's just very, very comprehensive and very, very good.
Oh, I'll grab those, because I use it all the time now. So that's pretty good. So that's what you've been up to. What about work? Any changes in work?
Well, I'm working at Verizon now.
Oh, right. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, that switched in January. So that's been definitely interesting. You know, working with Runar and Tim and Stu and Cody, and you know, the list sort of goes down the line. Just you know, one of those experiences where it's like, you know, it's really, 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 really great coworkers kind of push you to be better, because you never write code to your own standards. You write code to your coworker standards, or at least what you think your coworker standards are, right? So you're always like thinking to yourself, well, you know, what would Runar do? What you know, how would he solve this problem? Oh, well, he probably wouldn't like be lazy like I would be. He would probably actually do it right, and then you end up, you know, producing better code.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's good. I was lucky enough one time to get a few hours of pair programming with Paul Phillips, and regardless of what you think of Paul at any level, he is one heck of a Scala programmer. And if you ever get that chance, it's fun. It's fun to do that. He knows that compiler very well, so I learned a lot. So I guess if I can segue into what would naturally be a fairly natural segue, except the fact that I mentioned segue 3 times now, thus ruining the whole effect, is we've got conferences.
This segment sponsored by
Segue. We've got at least three conferences coming up, and I'm going to add another in there as well. So we've got Scala World coming up in just less than a month in the beautiful Lake District in the UK, which I'm very excited about because that'll be my first time going there. And I'm doing a talk with Josh, which is going to be cool, with lots of puns.
I can definitely recommend Scala World, by the way. I went last year, and aside from the fact that it's held in the UK, which means it's raining all the time, it's really really nice.
I have to take a slight issue with that. It's held in the Lake District, which is why it's raining all the time. England does have a lot of rain, but the Lake District has a lot of rain.
Yeah, the Lake District has a lot of rain.
You shouldn't necessarily judge the rest of England by the Lake District.
Well, I've been to the rest of England too, Bill. Like, it rains a lot there too.
Right, don't forget sunny London, as it's
oh yes, sunny London.
Sunny London. Anyway, so that's going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to that one. And then we've got Scala by the Bay coming up. That's October, I want to say. I should know this. Let me look it up and get that right. Scala by the Bay is coming. Anyway, that's by us. Scala by the Bay. It's a Twitter. I know that this year, and I'm doing a talk there, so I really should know when it is.
November 11th through the 13th.
Okay, November. There we go.
That's November like the warmest time of the year in San Francisco.
Actually, you're not wrong. It's cold. It's cold up in San Francisco right now. Good Lord, that was cold the other day. So that one's coming up. Scala Symposium. What's your level of involvement with the Scala Symposium anymore, Seth?
I never had any.
Oh, didn't you? No. It was
You might be thinking of the Northeast Scala Symposium.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, no relation. So Scala Symposium is sort of what used to be, like Scala Days used to be a combined industry and academic thing, and the academic part kind of got split off. That's the Scala Symposium.
Got it. Okay. And then the other one that I want to mention, because it's self-serving, but it is at least tangentially related to Scala, is Devoxx has the first US Devoxx next year. Have you guys been to Devoxx? Do you know about Devoxx in Europe?
Have not been.
Okay.
I think I've been at least once.
So Devoxx, Devoxx in Europe is absolutely massive. Like it's by far the biggest independent conference for developers in Europe, the main one, and it has all sorts of franchise, or it's got a franchise now with all sorts of other countries that have their own Devoxx. And so next year we've got Devoxx in the US for the first time, and it's quite exciting and also a bit nerve-wracking because these things often don't sort of translate well between continents, has been my experience. Just because it's big in one continent doesn't mean it's going to be a slam dunk in another one. So we're working really hard on it, and it's in March next year. The call for papers is going to open September the 1st, and I'm heading up. It's in San Jose. Good point. I should probably mention where it is. San Jose Convention Center, and I'm heading up the languages track on there, and I'm really going to sort of start going out and trying to find people. I'm particularly interested in this idea of introduction to new languages as part of this, and I'd like to get, obviously Scala's going to be well represented there, I have no doubt, but it would be nice to see things like Elm and Pony and Rust, other languages like that that are sort of just starting to get a bunch of attention. It would be nice to see some kind of intro to those coming up as well. That would be fun. So expect me to be knocking on doors and trying to get people involved.
Well, I know the PureScript folks would love to finally be able to earn the right to write their Wikipedia page.
There you go. That sounds like a great one to me. The only thing I know about PureScript is Bodil is quite keen on PureScript, I believe.
Yeah, Bodil's quite keen on it. So is Brian McKenna and John DeGoes and a number of other people. It's basically like somewhere on the Haskell to Idris spectrum, but compiling down to JavaScript.
Yeah. Well, that's the sort of thing we're looking for the languages track. So please, if you hear of this, or hear of this, submit some papers. We're going to be trying to make this thing nice and wide open and get lots of. In particular, I'd really like to make it sort of lots of intros to languages. Try and get a kind of map of the current language landscape out there for people. That would be really good. So, yep, that was my self-serving thing. So somebody else should talk for a while now.
I think we actually have an agenda of things put together by our only organized member. So we could probably start going into that.
I mean, there are a remarkable amount of stuff has happened in the last 4 months since we last 3 months since we broadcast, even though it's summer. I'll mention. I'll just run them down quickly,
sure.
And we can figure out which ones we actually want to talk about. Scala 2.12 is almost ready. RC1 should be out in a couple weeks. Scala Native is taking off. They've merged more than 100 pull requests. There's a new Learning Scala website called Scala Exercises. It's all open source. People can contribute not just exercises for Scala itself, but also for libraries. So, right now, if you go to the front page, there are Scala exercises and also a set for shapeless and a set for cats.
I see that. Yeah, that looks really good. Nice, clean design too.
Yeah, and they're actively encouraging people to add their own libraries to that. Scala Test 3.0 is out with full Scala JS support. There's a new initiative called Scala Bridge, looking to do outreach to women for learning or getting more involved with Scala. That's starting up in the Bay Area, like right now. The Scala Center activity level has exploded. They've hired a bunch of new people. There are a lot of progress was made on the existing projects, like Scaladex, which was launched and open source. The MOOCs have been launched. They've started work on a code migration tool to help with migration to Doty and to new Scala versions. And the Scala Center has taken over the SIP process. Jorge at the Scala Center is in charge of that. He's doing a fantastic job with making sure that all the SIPs are moving along. There are a lot of individual SIPs that we could discuss, maybe either this episode or another episode.
Assuming the other episode isn't in 3 months' time.
Right.
Right. Because otherwise they're all going to be done
on these SIPs.
Yeah.
We speaking from the future. So I think it's probably, maybe this is more of a niche thing, but I think it's worth talking a little bit about Doty, because Doty is one of the things that's happened or kind of taken a lot more flesh, and people have talked a lot more about how that migration path is going to go. Because that's really, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I really feel like how we handled the sort of Scala to Doty, which is to say Scala 2x to 3x transition, how we handle it is basically going to define the Scala community and the Scala ecosystem for the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, my impression of it changed slowly, gradually over the course of the year, because what I was thinking, I think like maybe a lot of people were thinking, was that essentially the Scala 2 line would sort of stabilize and largely not change now. And then there was a lot of work going into Doty, and that would suddenly come in. But now it looks more like it's a spectrum of there are features that are starting to come back down into the 2.x cycle from Doty, and that should smooth the transition over to Doty when it comes out as well. So things like trait parameters apparently are going to make it into the 2.x cycle at some point, which is good.
Trait parameters are coming. Some very, I know Adrian's talked about some very limited type parameter, type member unification, which is something that Doty has as a first-class thing. You know, possibly union and intersect types, which are another feature that Doty has. You know, value types, which, you know, again, so it sort of remains to be seen exactly how far Scala can go in that direction, because it's important to understand that like a lot of the sort of really specific semantics of Scala, especially in the typer when you really drill down to it, are in some cases like almost an accidental outgrowth of just like how a particular function was implemented inside the compiler, and nobody specifically designed it that way. It just like happens to work that way. Like for example, the like if you have a method, right, and then it has some type parameters on it that you're trying to infer from the values that you pass to the method, right? You know how the compiler will literally solve that in a left to right way.
Yeah.
It's very, very strictly left to right. The only reason that's the case is because type parameter solutions are written as a side effect within a loop over a list, and it happens to loop over the list in a left to right.
Right. Okay. Yep. Got it.
So like it's a completely accidental semantic, and so Doty actually doesn't have that semantic, which is something that's very interesting. And there's a lot of like subtle things like that I think are, you know, even as Scala does kind of converge towards Doty, you know, those sorts of things are always going to be out there where it's just like, oh well, this one random quirky thing because Doty is a different code base doesn't actually do it the same as this completely unspecified behavior in Scala.
Right. Ah, interesting.
Somebody tweeted, I think it was yesterday, a screenshot of IntelliJ offering Doty 0.1 as a choice of Scala version.
That is correct.
Wow. None of us have tried that, have we?
I've seen it demoed. I have never actually tried it because I don't use IntelliJ, but like I've seen it demoed, and it looked very smooth, like very polished. Basically, it looked like a first-class IntelliJ mode. There didn't seem to be any problems with it.
Oh, that's nice.
And I mean, and between that and the fact that like, I mean, Doty, like if you've ever looked at it, right, like Doty's tooling and bootstrapping situation is actually really good now. So it's actually very straightforward to get started and like spin up a Doty REPL on your machine, or like, you know, use Doty in SBT to compile a project. So if you want to like start playing with the language now, yeah, like IntelliJ certainly works, and I mean you've got a lot of options for how to work on it. Plenty of stuff.
We don't have enzyme support yet.
No enzyme support, and yeah, Sublime will not highlight certain things correctly.
Yeah, we've got time.
We have time, but yeah, IntelliJ, those guys are on the ball. Those guys are on the ball.
They certainly are. I was concerned.
In order for Enzyme to work with Doty, there'll need to be some story, for a presentation compiler, and that was proposed as a possible Scala Center project at the Scala Center advisory board meeting early this week. And I don't think anything was decided about it, but so this is a possible project, and if there are like sponsors out there who would like to help make that happen, they should definitely get in touch with the Scala Center.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was going to say that as well. Yeah, go on.
So one of the things to think about on that front, and I would assume that Dimitri and maybe Adrian or others mentioned this at Scala Center, is that like the presentation compiler is necessary for NSC, which is the current compiler, precisely for two reasons, right? Number one, NSC is not like it's not reentrant in a way that you can just sort of like keep it resident and talk to it and like jump in at arbitrary points in the compilation. Like you can't really do that just because of how the compiler is designed and the way the ADT works. And second, NSC is quite slow. and it's slow partially because it's doing a lot of work, and partially because certain ways of how it's composed together are in the broader architecture are not as optimal as they could be. Doty addresses both of those problems, and so it's actually sort of almost possible to get a presentation-ish compiler out of Doty just by like running it for like these phases and then stopping and looking at the result. And then, deciding that you want to start again and like you do this phase and like, okay, well, we're good here. Like manipulate the tree and do some other stuff. Like Doty's a much more, the Doty compiler architecture is really nice, and it's a much more flexible architecture. So it remains to be seen whether or not a presentation compiler is even necessary, because you might be able to get that functionality just out of the stock Doty compiler.
Well, I mean, it's definitely true that the Doty compiler was designed from the beginning with this use in mind. But the so-called presentation compiler in Scala C is also just the regular compiler. It's not a separate compiler. It is just Scala C stopping after a certain phase.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
The
difference being that Doty, you can actually just ask it to do that, as opposed to Scala C, where you had to like it had to be written specifically to stop at that point.
Yeah.
So.
Right,
yeah, I mean,
cool.
I think it'll be interesting to see where that effort goes, and how the Doty tooling ends up looking like as it fleshes out, right? Because like obviously the IntelliJ plugin for Scala doesn't use the presentation compiler,
Right.
So
they wrote their own.
so they kind of had in a sense a leg up in that, because they was just like, oh well, we'll just do that for Doty, whereas like Eclipse and Enzyme actually have to think about this problem. So it'll be cool to see how people address it.
Yeah, I was concerned. Going back to the IntelliJ support, I was a bit concerned when they started really backing Kotlin that the Scala support would be the first thing to suffer. But you got to hand it to them. They've kept that going, really admirably well, and now they're really on the ball with Doty as well. That's good. It's good stuff. They're not playing favorites, it seems. So that's good. Cool.
So I don't remember your list, Seth. So maybe you should just like pick another thing.
Yeah, we derailed you.
Yes, we did.
Halfway through there.
Well, I at least mentioned most of the news items. Spark 2.0 came out last month. I don't have much special knowledge of Spark, but I'm really relieved that the Spark people are finally on Scala 2.11. It's been this weird thing for a long time now when someone pops up with a Scala question and you, because of Spark, you had to wonder if they were actually on 2.10. Long after everyone else had
right.
moved on. So that's a big relief. You mentioned progress in Scala 2 world as well as in Doty world. There's some news items there. The notorious SI 2712
yes.
got. I hesitate to use the word fixed, but got addressed for 212 in a way that I think people are generally pleased with. Although I'd be curious, Daniel, for you to give an opinion on how you thought that all turned out.
Okay, so backing up to give some context then, like we should probably explain what SI 2712 is, because like it's a very memeable bug ID that doesn't actually explain what it is. And if you look at the description of the bug ID, it's like some very, very arcane construction of like types that Adrian put together, and then a link to a paper that is incredibly impenetrable. And he's like, we should implement this, and that's the bug, right? And it doesn't make any sense at all from the perspective of like people who are coming along being like, well, my stuff doesn't work. So
yeah, but the actual title, just so you know, is Implement Higher Order Unification for Type Constructor Inference.
That is correct. That is correct. And that is actually accurate, but completely impenetrable. So here...
We should leverage our corporate synergies while we're at it as well.
So here's essentially what it boils down to. Scala's kind system is not parametric in shape arity. And what that entirely dense sentence means is that a type constructor that has one parameter is not really the same as a type constructor, or in any sense related to a type constructor that has 2 parameters or 3 parameters or 4. So if you have some sort of higher kinded method signature that's trying to infer some type constructor, f square bracket underscore square bracket, right? So trying to infer a type constructor with 1 parameter, and then you pass it a value which is, say, of type either, right? Which is a type constructor that has 2 parameters. It cannot infer that type constructor, because you passed it something of type either that has 2 parameters. It was expecting something that had 1 parameter. So it would have been able to infer it if you passed it something that was like option or list or something like that.
Yeah.
Those have 1 parameters. But either it can't.
Is there an analogy to be made to help explain this to something at the value level? Like if we had a restriction this ridiculous at the value level, what would it be?
Well, it's actually so
type
if we map it to the, ironically, if we map it to the value level, it becomes really apparent why this is a hard problem. So basically, the situation would be like if you had a function that took as a higher order function something that was like from A to B, right? A function value from type A to B, and you had in your calling code, you had a function that was curried, like from A to B to C, right? And you, actually no, it's even better than that. You have a value that results from applying a function that's curried from A to B to C, and you pass that value to this higher order function that expects a function from A to B, and you want the compiler to magically infer that, like, oh, it was actually secretly an application of this function way back here, and oh yeah, this value gets injected into this slot over here.
Right. So
it's actually like, when you sort of think about it at the value level, it's actually not even that ridiculous. Like this is actually kind of a hard problem. It's like how, and it's sort of arbitrary, like how would the compiler actually fill this in? And this is why you're correct, Seth, that the bug is not fixed, because it can't be fixed. It's undecidable. It's the problem itself does not have a solution. And the paper that Adrian linked has some ideas for approaching it, and those ideas have been implemented in various languages like Isabelle, but like it still doesn't really address the underlying problem. So it's tricky, and it's sort of funny that we expect this to work at the type level, and we really want it to work at the type level, but it doesn't. So the fix for it, or the way that it's been addressed is the compiler will now basically just assume that your type constructors are being partially applied from left to right, which is to say that, if we go back to my earlier example where we're passing an either to a function that expects, an f, square bracket underscore square bracket, if we pass an either to that, then it will assume that the single type parameter is the second parameter in the either, and the first type parameter of the either is fixed. So it will basically infer a type lambda which partially applies from left to right. This is very, very similar to what Haskell's semantics are for like type constructors, except that Haskell gets that because its type constructors all have a single parameter.
Right.
So it's like Haskell basically gets this for free. Scala has to do it somewhat artificially. And this algorithm was proposed by Paul Chisano back in 2014 in a comment on the bug. And Miles Sabin eventually implemented it a couple of months ago, and found that in practice this tends to work out fairly well. I was talking to Lars Huppel, formerly of the ScalaZ project, and he's a PhD student in Munich and working on a proof assistant called Isabelle. And Isabelle has this higher order unification thing for its type constructors, like the paper that Adrian linked, like Isabelle implemented it. But Lars says that in practice, number one, people have no idea how the algorithm actually works, so they tend to be really cautious around it, and in practice they like contort their type constructors so that it's strictly left to right anyway. So really, like, what was implemented in Scala C by Miles is basically what almost everybody wants, almost all the time anyway. There are some exceptions to this, like Scalactic, which is Dick Wall's project, has a type constructor called OR, which is basically either, but instead of it being right biased, which is what ScalaZ's either is and Katz's XOR, and now the Scala.util.either is also right biased. The OR in Scalactic is left biased, so it would really want this partial unification to go from right to left instead of from left to right. So it kind of like, it doesn't break his stuff. It's certainly not going to work any worse than it does now, but he doesn't benefit from it in the way that like Scala Z or cats do.
Mm.
So, but it's a really exciting fix. It's hidden, if you want to use it in 2.12, it is merged. It's hidden behind a -y flag. So you have to do, I think it's like -y partial unification.
I think it's going to stay there for the duration of the 2.12 cycle.
That's correct, yeah.
But yeah, so it was Adrian, deemed that acceptable. Normally, we're very cautious about sort of splitting the language into multiple dialects by this proliferation of dash y flags.
Dash y flags, yeah.
But in this case, it's not so bad because there's no implications for binary compatibility. It doesn't. You never have to worry about whether a library that you're using was compiled with or without this flag.
That's correct. Yeah, it's solely. Yeah.
That's a good distinction to make as maybe a precedent as well.
Well, unfortunately, you have to refine it a little bit further than that, though.
Okay.
Like from a language standpoint, that is kind of mostly the only thing that matters. But from a library author standpoint, it becomes, and from a language user standpoint, there's another distinction here. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the kind projector plugin.
Yes.
But the kind projector plugin basically makes it so you don't have to write type lambdas with like the paren curly type lambda equals et cetera, hash lambda. Like that madness, you don't have to do it with kind projector. It's a compiler plugin that lets you use like question mark syntax basically, and it will just like put holes in your types. It's very, very convenient, and it too is binary compatible. Like it's solely at the type system. It's a syntactic thing. But the difference is that libraries like Scala Z or cats can compile themselves using kind projector and use kind projector's features, and the library users don't need to know or care about it. Like they don't need to use kind projector. They can use kind projector if they want to. They can use a different version of it. It doesn't matter. Like it literally doesn't matter because it's like all of it gets erased in the type signatures.
Interesting.
SI2712, like the partial unification change, is different because here library authors don't like. It's actually the call site that this fix changes, right? It's not the method definition site, it's the call site. So it's the people using your library who have to turn this on. And you as a library author have to worry about whether or not they have turned it on, because if they haven't, then you need to provide some implicit shims in order to actually make it work, which is like the Scala Z unapply thing. And that becomes really tricky then because you can create ambiguities. So it doesn't affect binary compatibility. You're right. So like from a language standpoint, it's sort of less concerning. But it is kind of a different. There are two different sorts of changes here, and SI2712 is kind of the stricter one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that as long as it's binary compatible, it's fine to to let the language continue to bifurcate. Of course, it has to be. That there has to be a really substantial win, which there clearly is in this case.
Right,
yeah,
but I do think probably the flip side of that is a good one, though, that these compiler flags should never produce binary incompatible within a single.
That's really important.
That would be chaos. That would be very, very tricky to stay on top of if that ever happened. So
you mentioned kind projector, and the mention made me realize that there's no SIP for that, and there's probably no good reason there's no SIP. I think it was just kind projector was a thing that happened at the time that in that long period where the SIPs just weren't happening. Mm-hmm. So if there's anybody out there who would like to see a better type lambda syntax become part of Scala, then I would definitely encourage people to either talk to Eric, the author of the plugin, whether he would want to do a SIP himself, or he might be happy if someone else volunteered to take that on. I don't see why that wouldn't have a good chance of getting into official Scala in the future.
So there are some subtleties to be aware of with that in particular. So if you remember the type level fork of Scala, right? One of the very first things they tried to do was implement a better type lambda syntax. Actually, ironically, based on the exact syntax that Doty uses for type lambdas, because like Doty has a syntax for doing type lambdas as a first class thing, and they tried to implement that in type level Scala, and it turns out that you run into some really strange compatibility issues with some constructions with existential types that literally no one cares about, but it does actually change the language. And they couldn't find a way to make it work realistically. So they kind of gave up on that idea, which is, I think, probably why no one has actually sipped it. Aside from the fact that the SIP process was stalled for years, right? But like, no one has really sipped this because it is actually a surprisingly subtle problem to get this in without breaking compatibility. And even Kind Projector itself, while it's a lot more conservative, like it doesn't try to do the Doty syntax, so it's able to be a little bit more aggressive about things. It will still, in some really particularly weird programs, it will change the meaning of your code if you have the plugin enabled. So it's something that I would imagine a SIP would be very optimistic at the start and then very sort of pessimistic and jaded at the end as people realize like all of the weird interactions.
Well,
yeah.
I was given to a moment of ponderance there. Maybe we should
not to throw cold water on anybody's hopes and dreams of type lambdas in Scala. It's just like like Scala is a very large language, right? And compatibility is a serious thing. So we have to be very careful when we do these things. And of course, Lightbend kind of being the steward of all of this stuff has to be extra careful.
So I'll mention a few other significant 2.12 changes that got in the last few months. One is that either is now right biased. I mean that's been going around and around and back and forth for a decade now, at least.
Someone did it. There was meant to be, and that while I think
the actual PR was from Simon Archenreiter.
Right.
Is it from Simon or from Dale? I don't remember. But yeah, the funny thing is, just a bit of history here, right? So Scala util either was originally written by Tony Morris, and his original version of it was right biased. And upon review of his code before it was merged, and this was like back in 2.7 or something like that, someone said, and I think it was Barack, but I don't remember who it was, but someone said that, we shouldn't assume a specific biasing. We should allow people to choose their biasing. And so that's where the dot right and dot left functions come from, is, he had to rewrite it. But Tony, is really mad at himself for allowing that change to happen, for not putting up more of a fuss. So we could have had a right biased either from the beginning, but it just wasn't meant to be.
Right. Yeah, so while I was doing the SIP/SLIP stuff, we did try and kick off an actual special interest group or expert group on that, but it never seemed to really pick up. And then eventually, I was pleased to see somebody just bit the bullet and did something, because you know what, actions speak a lot louder. So if the fact that somebody actually gone in and tried something was good in my opinion, and I've been following it. Now I think that it's happened. There's a bunch of people that are not so happy with the current state of things again, but you know what? They had a year to talk about it, and nobody did. So, yeah.
Well, I'm actually curious because I haven't really heard many complaints about it becoming right biased. Most of the complaints I've heard have been from the cats community trying to decide whether or not they should get rid of their own XOR.
Oh, interesting. Okay. No, it's only in the last week or two that I've seen some people that are still saying this is still watered down or not really what I wanted from either, and so I think it's just been on the getter. I've been noticing this. I have been lurking. People seem to think, or people probably rightly think, that I dropped out of the scene entirely, because I certainly seem to, but I haven't. I've been lurking. I've just been afraid to get involved because of the time commitments that it imposed before, and I just don't have the time at the moment. Although that's getting better again, so I'm hoping to become a bit more active again, particularly with things like this. So, but yeah, I think I haven't tried it yet because being mostly working on production code at the moment, I haven't put 2.12 on my machine yet to give things a whirl, and I probably need to create a little VM or something to just give things a try, and Doty as well while I'm at it.
Wait, you still install Scala from the tarball? I thought everybody used SBT these days.
Oh, well, that's true. No, I use SBT as well. Yeah, that's true. I could just
create a project or cross-build to it.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Of course.
I don't think that we actually really know yet what the reaction to the new version of either is, just because the change didn't quite make 212M5. So it's going to go in 212 RC1, and then most people have to wait until the libraries are published for RC1. So we'll find out more in the next couple months.
Yeah, and I think for the most part, I think a lot of people won't notice it because people who care about right biased either for the most part aren't using Scala util either right now.
Right.
And I think people will discover it progressively, and I think it'll be a relatively natural thing. I mean, the fact that it is sort of right biased rather than left biased might trip a few people up. But I don't expect it's going to be a particularly weird transition at all. And especially if CATS gets rid of XOR, which they're strongly discussing doing, and you have FS2, which is already using Scala util either. HTTP4S is going to use Scala util either, probably also Doby. You've got, as that happens, I think people will be exposed to it more and more.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the whole point for doing this was to try and reduce the level of fragmentation in the community around either types.
Yeah, well, I'm all for reducing fragmentation. I really am.
There's still clearly fragmentation around the pronunciation of either versus either, though. And I can't see that going away anytime soon.
That's just because you don't speak the Queen's English from 300 years ago, which we speak.
Imagine the amount of byte shedding that could generate.
Yes.
According to the law of the amount of byte shedding being inversely proportional to how trivial something is.
Well, I still hear people arguing about Scala Z versus Scala Z.
Excellent. Oh, that's crazy.
At least Scala is not something I hear very often anymore.
No, I still hear it occasionally.
Oh my gosh.
That's mainly because I train a lot of people. So people who come into it, their first instinct is to call it Scala.
No, I'm curious. Is it mostly American first instinct, or do Europeans have the same first instinct?
Oh.
Because I would imagine
it is more of an American phenomenon now.
Yeah, because it's much more of an American pronunciation for the word.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
I don't know.
Anyway.
I just remember when that was literally every person I ran into, I had to have that discussion. Good old days.
Yeah. So I'm looking over this list of news items, and I'm curious if you guys will agree, but I would summarize it by saying that I think early in this year and last year there was more of a climate of people feeling that things were stuck. It was like Scala 212 seemed to be taking forever. The Scala Center launch just got delayed and delayed. SIPs weren't happening. Language changes people wanted weren't happening. And I looked at this list of news items and I'm just like, it just seems like night and day. I hope that's that everyone has that feeling that things are really moving now.
Yeah, I definitely feel like that as well. Stuff is happening, stuff is moving forward. There's activity, and there's drama and discussions, and life in the process. So I think that I feel pretty optimistic, and I think we have very definite challenges ahead of us as a community, as an ecosystem. But I think that we are taking strides to board those and to address those.
Yeah.
Yeah. There have been some heated discussions around some of these developments, but no real bad blood this year.
No, unfortunately that was my experience towards the end of last year. Was the big blow up over the JSON AST, which I don't know what's happening with that, by the way. I haven't seen much along those lines, but that was not a happy time for me, and it was definitely one of the factors that led to me going, I don't really want to be doing this anymore. I don't want to be in the middle of something like this anymore. So,
where there's people, there's drama.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It just didn't seem to be going anywhere positive, that one. That was just a completely negative downward spiral. Whatever happened with that, by the way? Was anything Maybe I shouldn't stir it back up. Maybe we should just ignore it and move on.
Well, it's Matthew and a few other people who are involved have continued to refine it, and so once the slip process starts up again, which should be soon, I think the Jorge and the others at the Scala Center are sort of putting the finishing touches on a first public draft of a revised process. I think that will come back, and it will be one of the first things discussed, and it will be discussed also in the context of this idea of a Scala platform, or multiple Scala platforms.
Yes, because that's what the discussion actually became.
Yeah,
it wasn't about the JSON AST anymore. It became a big.
Well, it's like a philosophical battleground, right?
Yeah.
Like of the larger war, and I think that now that we've taken some time and we've kind of come to this idea, the idea of the Scala platform and multiple Scala platforms and batteries included things and like the Scala core and like what all of this means and at least an idea to shoot for. I think people that were really opposed to it are probably going to be less opposed to it on those philosophical grounds. I mean, I personally wasn't a fan of the idea of putting the JSON AST in there, but with this idea of the Scala platform and like this and that, I have absolutely no objections anymore. Maybe other people would have objections, but like I am placated, and I think many other people will be as well.
That's good.
I mean, I am a little afraid that when this starts up again, that the bad blood is going to come crashing down the elevator again, like in The Shining. Yeah.
I'm going to be on vacation at that time. I've already decided. Whenever that is, I'll be on vacation somewhere very, very difficult to reach. So.
Somewhere where there's a lot of wine.
Yeah, and a beach and no internet connection. Yeah, that sounds pretty good.
It's harder and harder to find these days.
I know, but I can work on it. I'll work really hard on that one.
Yeah. I'm a little disappointed to be on the West Coast now. It's Scalawags is going to be a morning thing, so no more wine for me.
Well, that never stopped Bill.
All right, I guess. Oh, there was the last one, SIP 23, Singleton types.
Oh yeah, Singleton types.
Yes.
This is super cool and also a lot less cool than it sounds. So this is the colloquial name for this SIP is the 42.type, right?
Yeah.
The idea that you can have a syntax for getting Singleton types for literal values for like ints, strings and things. This is something that's in Doty, confusingly enough with a different syntax, but it is in Doty, and it's ironically it's in Scala's type system. So through various witchcraft, you can actually convince the compiler to give you a Singleton type and hold on to it for like more than vapor in a wind, and you can have it. But as it turns out, for the most part, you can't do many useful things with it without using macros.
Right.
So I'm of the people I'm of the bend, like I do a lot of programming in the type system, I really do, but like I'm of the bend that thinks that this is not like actually as useful as it seems, just because like when you do programming at the type level, everything needs to be structural, and literal types are nominal. They're very sort of points in space that aren't related. So for example, like 1.type is not at all related to 2.type, other than the fact that they both extend int.
Right.
So,
right.
From a perspective of programming at the type level, I can't like write an inductive algorithm that like goes over the integers or something like that if the integers are defined as literals. So I mean, Doty's been kind of grappling with this problem as well, and they have some ideas for how to solve it. And maybe the SIP23 stuff will have some more solutions in that regard. But it definitely, if you're already doing macros, especially white box macros, this definitely does help some very significant things. Like you no longer have to do really contorted syntax to get literal types. You can actually just like say, for.type or string foo.type, and it just works, which is really cool.
Just to clarify the status on this, this is well, it's delayed until 2.12.1, which is not a huge delay. This is the initial work on it was done by Adrian Moores, and then Miles is sort of taking over the final polishing. And
Adrian's branch was almost done. Like he did a lot of work on it.
Yeah. So and then the current plan is to get this into 2.12.1, and it'll still be behind a flag. So I think there's a possibility of it coming out of the flag in a later version, but at least having it in the flag will enable people to start experimenting with it.
Yeah, and that it's like the SI2712 fix or change, I guess. It's also completely binary compatible, so you don't really have to worry about that. But I do actually wonder, like, Seth, have you heard anything about like the discussions on the syntax? Because it is, like I said, it's a different syntax than Doty, which seems like it's going to become a problem fairly quickly.
Yeah.
That's a really good question. I mean, on the PR, currently Doty is not even mentioned. So
maybe I should pop on there and mention that.
Yeah.
maybe people just don't know. Because like in Doty, you can literally say, x:1 equals 1. Like you don't say .type, you just say the literal, and that is the type.
That surprises me. I mean, I know that I remember Martin sort of suggesting that syntax, or asking whether the .type was necessary, but it seems. I mean, my reaction to that was always like, no, this is like advanced enough stuff that it's really better to signal it.
Well, the problem is that Doty has to do it a lot more often than Scala does because it has union types. So Doty will preserve those singleton types for a really long time and just sort of hold them in unions. And so unlike Scala, which will sort of take its singleton types and erase them really fast and just like turn them into int, Doty will actually say like, oh, you have an if that one branch returns 4 and the other branch returns 2. So the type of this if is 4 or 2, and it will hold on to that. And you'll actually see that type. So Doty has to have a more concise syntax for it.
It's a gut reaction, but I'm leaning towards the cleaner version as well, the non.type version, just because I've been doing some stuff with. Maybe this is a good chance to segue selfishly into one of the things that I've been really having fun with, and I'll keep it short because I know you're time limited, Daniel. But so one of the things I'm getting back into GIS now, which is a lot of fun. Geographical information systems. It's what my degree was in before I got sidetracked into genetics and things like that. And one of the things with GIS is that you have a world which is not flat, at least not according to most of the scientific understanding in the world. There's a couple of rappers out there that believe that it's still flat, I think, but we won't go into that. So you got this 3-dimensional thing, and you're basically trying to squish it down to 2 dimensions, and it's very hard. Anything you do is going to distort something about that. And all these things are called projections, and then you get a coordinate reference system built out of the projection. What's really interesting about this is that the coordinate reference systems are usually defined for a specific region, and they're valid inside of that region. They're invalid outside of, or many of them are invalid outside of that region. So like UTM zones, for example, are valid for 6 degrees around the equator of the Earth. Outside of that, they're undefined, but they can still work, and you shouldn't use them outside of that. In addition, because these things use different projections and different datums and geoids and all that sort of thing, you can still ask for coordinates in a different coordinate reference system, and you'll get an answer, and it will be the wrong answer.
So you want to dependently type your coordinate system.
That is exactly, and that's exactly what we've done. So the CRS, the coordinate reference system, is now a part of the dependent type, or a dependent type on the type. So when you have a coordinate, that coordinate is of a CRS. If you apply it to a coverage, a raster, for example, that raster has a CRS. Those CRSs have to agree, and if they don't, it's a compile error now. So you don't get, the best case you got before was a runtime exception that you were trying to ask for the wrong CRS. The worst case was nobody noticed and they gave you back the wrong value because it's the wrong point on the ground, and that's sort of the worst situation. So now all of these things are, polygons are with a particular CRS and coordinates are with a particular CRS, and all of that sort of encoded in the type system. And a lot of this is done in the types themselves, There's a certain amount done in the implicits because the type classes give you extra information about the CRSs. And so I find myself typing CRS.type or individual CRS definitions.type a lot, and it would really clean that up if that was. See, I'm tying it back into the original discussion here. It would actually clean that up a lot if that .type was dropped.
There is, by the way, a trick you can use to get around that now. That Shapeless uses. So if you look at how, so actually there's two tricks. One is the one that Shapeless uses. One is the one that I prefer. So if you look at either Shapeless or like my Shapely project, which I wrote for a talk, and you look at the HNIL type, you can see how the trick works.
Okay.
But yeah, like so if Shapeless, if you're building like an H list, right, you can say int cons string cons HNIL, and you don't have to say HNIL.type. You just say HNIL.
Right. Yep. Okay. Well, that's. I'll take a look at that. It's actually not that big of a deal because the upshot of this is, apart from the definition of the implicit, in almost every other case you're just using the type as a type parameter, and so it's not ugly there. It's only ugly in the definition. But there's just the occasional spot where it shows up still, and
well, syntax is important.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that's worked out really well. There's a blog post coming whenever I get to write the time to write it about encoding your CRS into the type system, which has worked out really well.
That is very cool.
Yeah, and it's something people can grasp very quickly, I think, that value. Yeah.
So I think we're out of time.
Yeah.
I'm about to turn into a pumpkin, and Seth is muted.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was about to start, fading in the closing music here.
Okay. So for those of you who
our music?
I don't know if this is our music.
Yeah, that's the music. That's the kind of Hammond organ bit.
Oh, it's the breakdown.
Yeah, the breakdown Hammond organ bit.
So for those of you who enjoy this content, we'll have another one for you in 6 months. And
let's try not to make it 6 months.
We'll try not to have it this long. Like I'm not moving again, and Seth isn't moving again, so I think we're in better shape now.
I think the other truth is Josh got busy, and without Josh to organize it, it just doesn't happen.
Really lost.
So yeah, we're all lamers. He's the one. Seth is a hard worker because he puts the notes together. Josh is the organizer. And the rest of us are just along for the ride, really.
Yeah, exactly. So, anyway, shout out to Heather, who couldn't join us today because she's in K-something-stan. And, hopefully she's having safe travels.
All right. It's an episode.